Okay, so let me introduce, this is Eric Lind and Laura McCarthy. So Eric's based out of the Albany, New York office, and he advances the practice of conservation through the intersection of education, engagement, and action. Prior to this position, he served as the Director of Community Science and Restoration for Audubon New York, applying, excuse me, 25 years of experience in field research. We also have Laura McCarthy, and she's also based out of Audubon's Albany office. Laura is the Audubon Connecticut, New York's Network Engagement Manager. In this role, she maintains a strong partnership with the many local Audubon chapters in both states, helping the many parts of the vast Audubon network collaboration towards our shared conservation and policy goals. All right, so with that, I'm going to let you share your screen, and I'll keep admitting. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. Let's see here. Now that I've done this, let's see if I can do it again. How's that look for everyone? Are you seeing it okay?
Looks great.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah, for including us here tonight. We're happy to be here. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about Audubon tonight, and I entitled this Bending the Bird Curve, and we will get to what that means soon. So a little bit of mystery here to start us off. Let's see. So you heard a little bit. Oh boy, here we go. I clicked it twice. Let's see if I stay here. Okay, good. So you heard a little bit about us. Again, I'm Laura. I'm the Senior Manager for Network Engagement with Audubon New York and Connecticut. We are a two-state regional office of the National Audubon Society, and I've been here for about 16 years in this role, working with our chapter leaders across both states to better connect and align our work. And I'll let Eric say a few words about himself too. Oh, and I did want to share what brings me to this work. I studied environmental studies and art and writing, and when a job at Audubon came my way many years ago now, I was very excited, and I've been here ever since. So it's sort of, birds are a love and passion of mine, but so is just nature and the natural world. So it makes me happy to work with other like-minded people and get to do this every day. So Eric, how about you?
Well, we actually have a similar backstory, although I've been with Audubon longer than Laura, over 30 years, like 31 years or something, which is really hard for me to get my head around, but the numbers don't lie. And like Laura, I've always had like a fascination with nature, a love of nature as a child. I feel very lucky, and fortunate to have had access to the outdoors. And over time, I felt like my love of nature was great, but I also felt like a compulsion to do something about it, join the conservation movement, and a position opened up in Audubon, and I took it, and that was 30 years ago. Again, the core of it was, I think, something we all share, which is a love of the natural world. And for me personally, I feel very lucky and fortunate to have had the opportunity to apply what I love to my career.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, we thought Eric with his water and me with my mossy rocks here kind of encapsulated what some of the things we love about nature. So, and some of the things that bring us to this work, and you all probably to the work that you do and to this call, our love of the natural world and birds. Most folks know us as the bird group. We are that, but we're more than that. Birds really lead us in our work, in our conservation work. And so we wanted to talk a little bit with you today about our reach and our network and our new strategic plan, which is called Flight Plan. And then when we move through that, I'll pass it back to Eric to speak a little more about some of the on-the-ground examples of this work. And we'll try to make lots of room for questions and conversation at the end if there is any. So let's get into it. So I'll pass it to Eric to tell us what we're looking at here.
Well, sure. This is a very rough map of where we are located across Connecticut and New York. And I guess maybe 5 or 6 years ago, the state programs were separate. after that point, we merged the Connecticut and New York activities into one comprehensive program. But these are the locations of where we are, and I'm going to start at the bottom. Our headquarters, National Audubon, is in Manhattan. We also have a youth education program in New York City that's based out of those offices. And then out on Long Island, there's the Theodore Roosevelt Center and Sanctuary. Moving north is Greenwich Audubon in Greenwich, Connecticut, a very well-established nature center and conservation program there. You'll see right on the Hudson River, Constitution Marsh, which has it's mostly owned by New York State, but we have a over 50-year relationship with New York State to manage the wetlands there as wildlife sanctuaries. There's a center called Bent of the River in Southbury, Connecticut. There's Sharon Audubon, which has 2 large properties, the center itself, and then a wildlife sanctuary called Miles. This, the one up near the Massachusetts border, is in Hillsdale. That's about 1,000 acres of forest that we own. The Albany State Office, as we mentioned, where Laura and I and our colleagues are located. And then out in central New York in the Finger Lakes region is the Montezuma Audubon Center that does our work out there. So you can see primarily staff is really heavily weighted to Western Connecticut and the Hudson River Valley. But our reach is across a much wider reach across both states, and partnering with Audubon Vermont and Pennsylvania and our other state programs.
And poor Mike Berger, we didn't have our Ithaca office that used to be an Ithaca office on the map. We used to be located at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, but we don't use offices there anymore. But we do have some staff in that area, and the Ithaca area is still based, including our executive director.
And I did realize I missed a couple of pins here for just wildlife sanctuaries where we don't really have staff located, but I'll get into that a little later.
Thanks, Eric. And so we also wanted to talk about the breadth of our network. So we have partner chapters across the state. This is just the map of New York right now, sort of honing in on the New York piece, but across the entire nation, there's about 460 Audubon chapters, which are independent 501c3 organizations, but they are, in many cases, our closest partners. They're really the eyes and the ears on the ground in their communities. They're often the places where members connect with Audubon. My job, my actual role is to work closely with all of these partners in New York and Connecticut, and with my national colleagues who are doing the same across the vast network of chapters throughout the country. So this is what New York looks like now. And we have 27 chapters in New York, 5 in Connecticut. Most of our chapters are all volunteer led. So they're small organizations that lead programming and bird walks. And many of you might be familiar with the Audubon Society of the Capital Region, which is the local chapter here in this area. And also Southern Adirondack Audubon Society, just to the north, that many of you know John Lowe's. He's part of that chapter as well. And we also hold some regional meetings where our chapters get together. We're actually just coming off of one now. So we have some really great opportunities for chapters to work together toward our common goals. And I'm going to talk a little bit more now about what the common goals are. So flight plan, I mentioned, this is the strategic plan that we are taking off on as we speak. Flight plan is Audubon's new strategic plan, and it's the high-level vision and framework for how we will measure success for bird conservation. And so this slide gives a hint at the title here. You can see a curve going downward because we are really in a critical moment for birds and people. The dual crises of climate change and biodiversity loss are the defining challenges of our time. And we're really going to be remembered and judged by the process we make toward addressing these challenges in the next decade. So this is showing a 2019 paper in Science that documented the loss of 3 billion birds in North America since 1970. That was a bit of a wake-up call for us as a bird conservation organization. The lead author on that paper is Dr. Ken Rosenberg from Cornell. Ken is retired from Cornell now, and he has just recently joined our Connecticut and New York advisory board. So we have the pleasure of working with him and having his expertise on our board, which is fantastic. So what Flight Plan does is harness the full power of Audubon, including on-the-ground staff across the Western Hemisphere, centers, sanctuaries, and chapters, all that we were just showing you, by focusing on a set of shared outcomes for greater collective impact toward our vision. And our collective long-term vision is to bend the bird curve, to halt and reverse the decline of birds. So how are we going to do that is the next question. As a longtime pillar of the conservation community, Audubon is rising to meet the urgency of this moment through the power of birds, what people love and what people, what bring people to this work. So we're building upon decades of accomplishments, a strong scientific backbone, and a nonpartisan approach. And that's Audubon working to focus on delivering tangible outcomes for birds and people at the scale of the challenges we face. Our mission hasn't changed, that's here. But what's new is a guiding star vision and a confirmed sense of purpose here. So through Flight Plan, Audubon is working to protect key habitats, accelerating natural climate solutions, expanding the deployment of renewable energy, and engaging a diverse and ever-growing community to act on the behalf of birds. And it's our unwavering commitment to the conservation of birds, which is rooted in the understanding that birds serve as critical messengers for our planet's health. And we also believe that the joy of birds, like I said, bring people in, and that's a powerful conduit to engage an ever-growing community in the serious challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss. So what drives us? I'm going to click through to show you. We have 3 drivers that are sort of embedded in everything we do. This hemispheric approach to conservation, climate change, and EDIB. Equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So we're taking a hemispheric approach. We approach the places birds need in all the places they call home. Their seasonal migrations across the Western Hemisphere mean that Audubon 2 works from boreal Canada to the Carolinas to Chile and beyond. We center climate change. This is critical right now. Traditional conservation approaches alone are no longer adequate in the face of a warming planet. And so we've really got to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And EDIB, we're integrating this into all of our work. Our influence depends on the strength of our community, and Audubon is committed to being a home for all bird lovers and to build a broad, diverse community that's poised to make a difference for birds. Audubon is uniquely positioned to bring people together with a nonpartisan, science-based, and community-focused approach. And I'll say toward that approach too, Flight Plan was developed collaboratively with a broad and deep engagement from over 1,000 staff, board directors, chapters, and partners. And so this is really what it looks like in terms of the milestones and then the metrics. And this is I'm going to stay pretty high level with this, but I did want to show you this so you could get a sense of it. It sets a course for positive changes for the next decade. It sets 5-year milestones in these key areas to track progress toward our long-term vision to bend the bird curve. In other words, to halt and reverse the alarming decline of birds that we were just talking about. So we'll work in places where birds need us most, from the boreal forests of Alaska and Canada to the tropics and coasts of South America, with that idea that birds know no boundaries, we shouldn't either. So that working hemispherically piece is really important to this. I'm not going to read through all of this, but I'll leave it up here just for a second. But as you can see, there's these 5 milestones, 2 of them related to climate. So the habitat conservation one is where the majority of our New York and Connecticut work really does lie, in the habitat conservation piece, doing that. And then the policy work, I'm going to talk about that in a second, and then community building. And Eric is going to talk about some examples of how our work fits into these in a moment. Before I hand it off to Eric, I did want to chat about that specific policy work. You all being here in the Capital Region, I'm sure are involved to a degree in some of this work as well, but we are excited about how we engage on the policy level. We're lucky to have a great policy lead in both states. We have Erin McGrath in New York leading our policy work, and Robert LaFrance, who leads our Connecticut work. But I'll talk for a minute about what's happening in New York before I hand it over to Eric. I'll also mention on the federal level, we collaborate really closely with our national policy team in DC. on the federal policy and advocacy too. So each year we develop and pursue a state policy agenda focused on conservation outcomes related to our priorities, including forests, coasts, climate, Great Lakes, and community conservation. We're an important player in New York State politics. We work alongside our partner organizations like the Nature Conservancy, Sierra Club, Citizens Campaign for the Environment, and many others in coalitions that perhaps many of you are part of as well to help move these priorities forward. We also engage and involve chapters and other parts of the Audubon network in advocacy. And I'll talk a little bit more about an opportunity for that when we wrap up. But some of our priorities this legislative session, I'll just run through a really quick list. They include incentivizing natural climate solutions, promoting lights out and bird-friendly buildings, protecting coastal communities from climate change, conserving core habitat for declining grassland birds, responsible siting of renewable energy, and something we've been working on a lot recently, the budget, which is going on as we speak and hopefully wrapping up soon. And that includes maintaining funding for the New York State Environmental Protection Fund, Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, Federal Clean Water and Drinking Water Revolving Loan Funds, the Oceans and Great Lakes, and the New York State Clean Water Infrastructure Act. And we do know the governor has committed to some great stuff in the budget already, namely maintaining strong environmental investments with $500 million for clean water, $400 million for the EPF, the Environmental Protection Fund, and $47 million to support the governor's goal to plant 25 million trees by 2033. We're excited about that and look forward to helping to guide that work to make sure those are native species and the ones we want to see. And this is just a couple of photos to share, sort of to illustrate the work we do with partners, with our Audubon chapters, and as part of the larger coalitions I was mentioning as part of our policy work. Some of these are lobby days. Some of them are just one-on-one meetings. And the ones with the green scarves, for example, are Parks Advocacy Day, where it's a big part of talking about the budget there as well. I'm in some of these. And then you can see down on the bottom here with Representative Swazi and some of our Long Island chapter leaders, engaging him in a bird walk to talk about our issues. So that's just some examples of the reach of our network and how we engage our chapters and our partners in the work here, which is really important. So with that, and like I said, I'll touch back on policy when we get to the end here, but I'm going to pass it over to Eric to share a few examples from our team.
Sure. Thanks, Laura. I'm always so fascinated that, we set ourselves up to talk about birds and biological diversity, but immediately the topic switches to people. That last photograph shows how deeply connected we are to conservation. It's like you can't talk about birds without talking about people. And I thought that last slide was as important as the second slide of all of the beautiful birds that in the picture that Laura showed earlier. So back to another map. This is just New York stuff. Don't tell our Connecticut colleagues that I left them out. But again, New York City, Oyster Bay, Long Island. This is Western Putnam County in the Hudson Valley. We have about 600 acres of farmland and forest in Dutchess County, near the town of Pine Plains. There's the property of the 1,000 acres of forest in Hillsdale in Columbia County, across the river near Catskill. There's a tidal wetland, freshwater tidal wetland called Ramshorn. The Albany State Office, there's Ithaca, and like I said earlier, the Montezuma Audubon Center. So out of all these places, we selected 2 or 3 just to show you examples of what the work looks like on the ground. And I think we're going to start with coasts, right? So the work out of Long Island, which is based at our facility in Oyster Bay, is very closely connected to the conservation staff and the staff at the center. So typically you might think an Audubon Center is a place where you can go and recreate and hike trails and look at birds. And of course, they are that. But in this case, there's this whole other element of the work, and it's maybe not as well known as you know, the traditional way of visiting an Audubon center, but this is what it looks like. So we work on coasts because that's where the birds are. There's a few species that are endangered and very rare, and there's a whole series of threats that these birds face. Beaches are very popular for people to go to and recreate and walk dogs and drive vehicles, fly kites, all of that stuff. The birds are there. They're very sensitive to human disturbance. Now we have sea level rise, which is encroaching on their habitat from the water side, and their birds are getting pinched from a rising sea level over time to the upland habitat behind the beaches where the birds they can't live there. And of course, beaches are, everybody's seen the coastal development is quite dramatic too. So these birds have a lot of threats, and we're trying to figure out how to address those threats. How do we bend the curve for these birds back upwards? And these are just a few examples of our approach. There's habitat stewardship, there's monitoring of the birds. So we hire seasonal staff. These are typically conservation biology students that work for us during the summer, and they're out in the sun all the time, monitoring these birds, looking at them, watching them, seeing how many chicks hatch, are the nests successful, et cetera, et cetera. There's a public outreach component and a community engagement component, which is illustrated, I think, really nicely on the picture above. These two young women are volunteers. And like myself, I'm sort of an introvert, but they're not. So they're very willing to engage with beachgoers and talk to them, let them know, provide education that these birds are there and there's things they can do to help them. And something easy might be to just, you know, not let your dog run wild along the beach, because that really traumatizes the birds. And then the end result of this is that they'll ask, you know, a beachgoer to sign a pledge. And it's a very simple thing to do, but it's very effective. Once you sign a pledge, you're making a commitment, in this case, to these two young women who were chapter members of a chapter out on Long Island. And if I sign that pledge, now I have a commitment to uphold the pledge. And it's turned out to be quite effective. And another example of our coastal work is really focused on salt marshes. There's rare species in these marshes that are undergoing very similar threats to what I described along the beaches. And there's opportunities for protection, especially habitat restoration, because we've mistreated these marshes over the decades quite badly, and they can be restored or enhanced. Here's the policy element again. We can support sound policies either on the local, federal levels or state level to direct funding for coastal protection, natural climate solutions to stabilize these areas and protect private property from storm surges. So salt marshes are well known to attenuate the force of wave action during storms or extreme high tides, and they also serve as bird habitat. So you're finding solutions to declining bird species, but also these places serve to protect our properties. And then as a last resort, there's a coastal retreat. Sorry, I'm so interested in this stuff that I'm going on, but that's okay. The coastal retreat, if there's nothing else you can do, you have to move inland. You have to escape the rising sea. So that's an option too. The other part of this is our healthy forest initiatives, and this encompasses pretty much the rest of New York State. An example of this takes place, this Rhinestone Hill picture on the right is the property in Columbia County. Sharon Audubon is nearby, actually, in Sharon, Connecticut. And our forests have been all cut over. Most of New York State was cleared of their forests 100 years ago. And as they grew back, they're all the same age class. It's very sort of homogeneous habitat. So in order to make them healthier and restore them, we actually cut trees. We remove trees that are unhealthy or maybe introduced species, and we make room for the forest to grow back. And that adds structural diversity, age diversity, and accompanying the habitat diversity elements, the wildlife respond. You'll notice, and it's very hard to see in the Rhinestone Hill picture, a very flat area and then a fence where the vegetation is maybe like 6 feet high. And so we have to put up that fence to keep white-tailed deer out. And white-tailed deer, their populations are very strong, and there's too many in a lot of these forests, and they'll come in here and eat all of the restored work, and we can't have that. So we fence it, allow the vegetation to recover, and through all of this, we're monitoring what birds do we have, how are they responding to our efforts here, and we can assess it and make adjustments. I could go on more with this, but I think that's good enough. Did you want me to cover this one, or was this you, Laura?
Sure. Well, I can certainly say some things about it, but
yeah. So
we just thought this was an interesting thing that you all would be interested in. And like Eric said, we're just touching on a couple of examples of the work that fits in with Flight Plan, but along with our forest work, this bird-friendly maple thing is pretty cool. We're partnering with maple producers. We're establishing sort of a bird-friendly maple marketing materials that they get in exchange, and signing them onto our program. This is a little outdated of a map already, because I think we have more like 20, we're in the 20s with the participants now rather than 19. But yeah, I just wanted to share this because it's developing, and it's something that's happening not just in New York and Connecticut, but we're partnering with Vermont on this as well. Eric, what did I miss?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. But the thing I like about this is that now the forest owners have an incentive to manage their property to benefit birds. They can also, of course, make and sell maple syrup and brand it as bird-friendly, maple managed for birds. You can see the scarlet tanager image up here. So now the landowner has an incentive to manage their forests appropriately for maple syrup and for birds. And that's really, really key. And the other point I just wanted to make, going back to the previous slide, is, we're not just restoring the forests for ourselves. We then couple that work with training for foresters, and most of the forest in New York State is owned privately. So private landowners and foresters, and those are the audiences that really have the influence. Our staff, our forest management staff in New York is 2. But if we target the right group of people, foresters and property owners, forest property owners, then the work kind of can really be leveraged to a much larger percentages. So, and then lastly, I just wanted to touch on the community conservation aspect, and I'll just quickly read this paragraph below. But bird-friendly communities and the strategy, we work to meet the needs of birds and the places we share with them, which is sort of like what I just described, specifically by providing food, shelter, and safe passage, and places to raise their young. And again, here's the relationship between us and birds, offer us a richer, more beautiful, and healthful place to live. So most of the people don't live, in upstate New York. There's a lot of people that can participate in conservation that live in towns and cities and developed areas. Not exclusively, but this community conservation work is really the pathway for people that live in cities to participate in conservation. This can take place in local parks, any green space really in a town or city. And here's a few examples. Demonstration gardens. There's a close relationship, as you all probably know, between native plants and native wildlife, birds included. So you can actually, design it's, I don't want to say a natural area, but you can create a habitat in your yard or park that is also bird friendly, and you can invite your neighbors or park employees or whoever to come see it. Native plants have a kind of, it's actually getting quite popular now, but people think they're kind of weedy and maybe not as attractive as the more cultivated plants, but you can design a bird-friendly habitat right in your backyard. And I think, I actually prefer the naturalized look. And another way in, and this is how young people really learn, we have options. We can sit them down and lecture to them about how important birds are to me. Or we can get them outside and give them real world experiences in what the work is. Physical work, planting trees like you see here, engaging with their neighbors and friends, and all of that sort of more social interaction that can take place when we're working with younger audiences. Oh, I have a couple. You want to take this one, Laura, while I put some links in the
Sure.
chat?
Yeah, great. So some other things, sometimes people wonder what they can do where they are. And we were talking about native plants and, taking care of your yard in a way that's friendly for birds. Reducing collisions and making glass visible so that we're reducing the collisions, and turning off the lights, things like that are easy things that people can do. These are showing, physical barriers put on windows. And then here on the these big windows are actually my big windows. We made these bird curtains here that are hanging down that you can hardly see through the snow here. These vertical lines on our windows are bird saver curtains that we made ourselves. And I think Eric's going to put some links in the chat for a little more about, like, you can research how to make those easily. I didn't make them myself. My husband did. I'll give him the credit. But I use this picture because it's an easy way to show that because of these vertical curtains here that are just paracord, that are loose, they blow in the wind, they show enough of, they break up the reflection of the forest that's reflected in our windows usually. And we have reduced bird collisions on these windows. When we bought the house, it was definitely, I called it bird bonk central. We had a lot of bird bonking, and now we hardly have any. And we do have a lot of glass. So we made sure to get these up. In the years after we moved, we've been adding them to all of our windows as we go. And now I don't have to get up from my office as often and run outside to try to see what kind of bird it was that I just heard hit the window, because it hardly ever happens. So just some easy things you can do. Eric, did you have anything else to say on that?
Just one thing. It may seem like a small thing, but bird collisions into windows is a huge problem if you look at the problem sort of nationwide. Millions, if not, like the numbers are staggering in terms of how many birds crash into glass and die. It's a really big threat to bird populations and a contributor to that declining curve in that graph that Laura showed earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So it may seem like a small thing, but it's actually quite significant if you look at it from a higher level perspective.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to move on to something we can do now. So this is exciting. I got news on this as we were getting ready to close out for the day and then get ready for this chat here tonight. So this is an action alert that is live right now. It's about the Migratory Birds of the Americas Conservation Enhancement Act. And I say that we have late breaking news because I was going to tell you that we were hoping that you would sign the action alert so that it would pass in the Senate, but we got word that they passed it last night, which means the action alert has now shifted to focusing on making sure that the money that we're talking about for this program is at the level that we need it to be at. So I'll back up. The Migratory Birds of the Americas Conservation Enhancement Act, it's a federal bill. It builds on the success of the Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act program grants. These are grants that provide crucial funding source to help declining populations begin growing back by supporting more conservation projects on the ground, mostly in South America and the Caribbean. And so the legislation would reauthorize the program at $6.5 million for these grants. This passed in the House last week, and again, last night, passed it in the Senate, which is fantastic. So if you see the link that Eric's going to put the link in the chat, I think in a minute, if he hasn't
It's
yet.
in there. Yep.
Right. If you want to take a minute, you can click on that. It has been updated to include a message to our representatives, thanking them, I believe, probably for passing this, but then urging them to keep those appropriations at that level that we need them, because in the past it has been offloaded and we haven't seen quite the right amount that we want. So take action on that, please, and then share it with others. This is an easy way to take action. It's also an easy way for our Audubon chapters all over the country who are right now being asked to do this and to share this with their membership. And it's a testament to how it can work. These action awards work because they are seeing, our senators and our representatives are seeing the pressure put on, and they're acting on that. And that's just a lovely way to show support for not only for Audubon, but it's a lovely way to show support for these birds. It's one of the ways we're engaging our full network in hemispheric wins for birds. So that's one thing that's exciting, and I like to share late breaking news. And so we hope that by doing things like this, just one small example, we will bend that bird curve. We hope together we can do this. So it's a lot. Our flight plan is pretty forward thinking and has a lot in it. But if we can add up all these small conservation actions and some of the things Eric and I have been talking about, we're looking forward to being part of making that bird curve go the way we want. So that's all we wanted to share today. For the most part, we want to have time for conversation and questions for sure. So I'll leave the slide up just for a second in case you want our email addresses. That's mine there and Eric's, of course. And there's a beautiful little pullover on the beach with some tags. And if you have questions about birds, we'll take those as well. But I think.
Oh, that was really great. That would be great if we have a small group, if you can unmute yourself and ask questions. I have a couple I could start with while people are thinking of theirs.
And I haven't even seen the chat, so I think Eric has just been putting some links in there. So those
Right.
are there. Thanks, Eric.
Excellent.
Our link master.
Now, with the chat, is that when we record, Josh, does the chat and the addresses on there come through? I'm actually not sure. I should know that.
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure.
Anyway, I did
there's-
copy down and copy and paste like the take action now, and we will share that on our ECOS website for you.
Thank
Great.
you. That's great.
Yeah. One thing I want to ask is, do you have lesson plans that you share when we do school programs, things like that, available from Audubon to get some of your messages out?
I'll let you take that,
Yeah,
Eric.
Yeah, we have, so each one of the centers or education programs operate, in their own sort of school districts. And so some of the stuff may not apply, but we do have that youth education program in New York City, and the staff there have developed, a really thorough curriculum and lesson plans about birds. It's sort of like ornithology. It's not necessarily conservation, of the birds, especially if the children are young. They have a separate program for high school age students, and that age group, they're ready to do something. But I can definitely find, something that you're specifically looking for and share it.
That would be great. And maybe we're not specifically giving just Audubon's programs, but we do have all kinds of events and things with children. We hope for more in the future. And if we could have some of the, lesson plans and things to incorporate into what we're doing, it probably would be really helpful.
Yeah, I would happy to help with that.
I'd like to talk very briefly about what's going on in Niskayuna. There's going to be an Arbor Day celebration on the 27th from 11 to 1 with a variety of things going on, one of which is a table that I've been asked to set up about birds. I plan to pretty much focus on what I've been doing at Blatnick Park, which is a combination of helping persuade the town to set up grasslands, low mow initiatives, and also maintaining an 18 birdhouse loop or trail at Blatnick Park. In the past few years, a gentleman, Bob Unick, has been banding the tree swallows and bluebirds out of those boxes. He's mid-80s, losing his energy. I'm 83, so I'm wondering if there isn't some help available, especially in the banding of those birds in those bluebird houses.
I don't know about banding. We would have to dive into the banding network to see if there's somebody reasonably local to take that on. But there are, of course, other ways of monitoring birds, and you're probably already doing this, Roy, where you don't have to catch them. You count chicks, you count which ones fledge. So there's other ways of monitoring bird populations that doesn't involve that sort of, banding work, which is fairly specialized. And again, you probably know this, there's a well-established bluebird box network across the country. So the other methods of monitoring, if you can't find a bander, might be something to look into, and there's lots of information out there. I can actually probably find the link to the Bluebird Box Network just to get that started. Would that be helpful?
I can give you my email address.
Yeah. Hold on. I have a pen. And I'll email it to you.
Great. It's Shivaree, I'll get it, SHIVAREE 18 @gmail.com.
Shivaree18 @gmail. And one quick other point, this low mow project that you're working on, that's excellent because who's making the decisions in terms of how frequently or what height that, I mean, people love lawns. So entering into that, I think I'm saying stuff you've probably been doing for years, but entering into that world of influencing the decision makers in the town of Niskayuna and connecting with local officials to make changes is like, that's amazing to me. We could spend hours and hours and hours trying to get somebody to change their behavior. But if you find the right audience and you can get like a local ordinance passed or something like that, then you're kind of home free because it's pretty much permanent.
I think that the town, at least as it's made up right now, is in favor of it. There are some different entities involved in that. The main one is the highway department, which does the maintenance. Then there's a conservation advisory council, which is right now in favor of it. And the town supervisor is in favor of it because she's done things on her own, like have her own pollinator garden in her yard. up to that point, it was very difficult to get the highway department to change their mowing habits.
Yeah,
Wanted to mow it to 3 inches like every 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think you've got them on board now. That's great.
that's great to hear.
Yeah,
There's
Roy,
a,
I was gonna mention, Roy, I thought of you last weekend. I took the pass around the I think 3 of the birdhouses on the bike path side around the landfill are all have birds in them. It was last weekend.
the tree swallows are out in force there, and I've seen 1 pair of bluebirds, but
Yeah, I didn't see one. Yeah, at least one was a bluebird.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent.
anyway, what my experience with the town landfill has suggested to me is that there are other opportunities on landfills which are probably not being taken full advantage of. When I go to Boston, I drive by a huge landfill at Chicopee. And I wrote a letter to the Mass Audubon Society and got kind of a non-committal response back. So apparently they're not really doing anything on that one. There's a big landfill in Colony, which is still sort of in operation, but it's partly closed. That might be another opportunity for grassland birds. And then the Albany landfill, which I think is close to being closed, is associated with the Pine Bush Preserve. And that habitat may already be covered in terms of some brush and some grassland. But I don't know whether there's any effort on your part to address these smaller units of these landfills.
It is something some of our chapters have taken on. I think in Westchester, at least, there's a chapter who's working on a landfill and does a lot of bird walks there now, in fact. But it's not something that I've been involved in. Eric, do you have any more on that?
No, I was just gonna say the same thing. It's Croton Point Park
Right.
is the location. And again, you saw, how there's only there's a limited amount of reach that staff have.
Right.
But for something like that, connecting with the chapter, the members of Audubon, they're the ones with the influence because they're neighbors, residents, and they're there all the time. And the chapter played a key role in doing just what you're describing, which is converting a just horrible landfill, capping it, and turning it into a grassland. And it's attracted a lot of birds and birders, of course. There's always another step to take, right? There's a lot of exotic plants in there that, might need attention. There's also like venting of methane that can be a problem because hawks like to perch on the vents, and that's not so great, especially if they're lit. So there's everything is complicated, but I feel like, the basic starting point is to restore the wetland to a grassland. And, that's really the starting point. And like Laura said, we would be relying on local advocates to drive those projects.
Right. Well, your role, I guess, would be that of a nudge, maybe.
I'd be a nudge. I think we're good at that.
And I'll put a link to just in case anyone's curious. I couldn't find the page on Croton Point. I thought they had something, but Sawmill River Audubon is the chapter that's been really active on that partnership and had a lot of success.
Yeah, and it's a county park.
Well, I have no power over a Colony landfill. As a resident of Niskayuna, and with my ability to gather other supporters, I think I have a list of 25 people who agreed to have their names attached to a letter to the town supporting this formation of grasslands up there. So that was one of the parts that helped get this thing going. You're right about invasive species. there are a variety of invasive species on and around the landfill. Multiflora rose, teasel, Phragmites, uh, Oriental bittersweet, uh, bush honeysuckle,
Wow, you have
You
them all.
pretty much all of them, right?
Who doesn't?
And of course, the town is not paying much attention to those at all.
Yeah, sometimes, you know, once an area is covered by exotic species, sometimes there's really not much you can do. You know, and the attention then shifts to protecting areas that aren't. And so, you know, it feels like a sacrifice, but it's really a wise move in order to, you know, restore a large area that's covered with exotics. You know, the only way to do it, you know, efficiently is to use herbicides. So a lot of, you know, that's not so great either.
No,
And it's a huge project. You know, you have to apply the herbicides several years consecutively. It has to be monitored and all of that. So, you know, once these things get established, there's oftentimes nothing you could do. I think you can do stuff on a smaller scale, you know, like, you know, get a group of people together and yank, you know, yank out some of these plants. But on a kind of a landscape scale, it's really challenging and expensive.
I understand.
On that note, Eric, I think one of you, or maybe Laura, touched kind of briefly on the high deer pressure and, you know, how damaging that is, changing the whole species composition and,
Right.
you know, giving preference to multifloral rose based on what deer prefer to eat and not eat.
Right.
And it's a very touchy subject. And there's a lot of well-intentioned, well-educated urban, suburban population that has dug their heels in on, and I wonder, does Audubon have any methods of addressing, changing that mindset that, you know, it's almost
Well,
like the more deer, the better, a lot of them.
yeah, that's very difficult because once you're emotionally attached
Yeah.
to them, then you're, you know, changing their behavior becomes really, really difficult. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I love deer. Every time I see one, I'm like, oh, wow, it's so beautiful. So what we do in Audubon, we sort of follow the science. We'll partner with the state, the DEC, and if there's oftentimes, like they have a deer management, DMAP, deer management assistance program, where if you open up your property to deer hunting,
Mhm.
you can give out extra permits to hunters. Now the hunters then become your ally.
Mhm.
They're partners in this. They have a stake in, you know, in the health of the deer population as well. This particular project focuses on antlerless deer. So the hunting pressure then is directed towards females.
Mhm.
And the reason behind that, I think, is because an older female typically will have twins each year. So the population is just, you know, always at a high level. But so that's the approach. Where can we help to, you know, diminish the deer herd? And it is controversial, and I bet you a lot of people really object to what I just described. But,
Yeah, and
you know,
part of that issue, I think, is that works well working with private landowners in areas, you know, there are private landowners of substantial acreage. And when I think about where I live in Niskuna with a, you know, 100-acre rice preserve, there's the Mohawk River, the walkway, and there is just so much, you know, the understory is non-existent. And everything that, you know, from the insects up depend upon. But these are not, there's no landowners to work with, and it really is a difficult emotional thing for people to, you know, I walk with people that look at that and they actually believe that people are cutting all the understory. And I try to point out, I mean, actually one of my summer jobs was deer pressure research with the Forest Service. So,
Mhm.
I'm trying to point out what you're seeing is the result of deer population. And
Yeah, the
Yeah.
populations now is like 10x what it was before the
Yeah,
area was settled. And as you mentioned, Eric, like normally it's the harshness of the winter that decides whether the doe will have one or two fawns. And if we have a mild winter, they'll generally have two. And yeah, the population's exploding. And number of hunters is down, the huntable land is down.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a tough problem. That's why we put up deer fencing.
I was gonna
It's-
say those exclosures that you saw in that slide, remarkable, the difference between what's inside the fence and what's outside.
But I
Eric and I
almost,
were just down there taking down one of the fences that's
Yeah.
been up for a very long time, and now that most of the understory has grown to a point where the deer won't impact it so much, we've taken it down, and we were successful in, creating that understory.
but I feel like
Can we
Sarah,
say
I'm sorry, I cut you off.
oh, well, just on Laura's point real quick, I'm just always interested in bridging the gap, because those kind of scenes are what I see, as a forestry student working in the summer with, all these different forest types of regeneration and cutting. But the introverted scientist never seems to, has trouble bridging to the public and getting those kind of pictures, and people need to base their theories on facts, and that's what just there just doesn't seem to be that ability somehow, or marketing, to almost get this information so that they can see the the research tends to stay
Yeah, I feel like what
scientists.
we're sort of touching on is another aspect of what we can do. Now, this is a group of us that understand the problem and the nuances of managing deer populations. Letters, articles, walks, are all discussions with neighbors. All of that are a form of education. It may feel like, you're just beating your head up against a wall, but I feel like that's a critical element of this, is to provide scientific-based information all the time with patience and understanding to the people that don't understand the severity of the problem. And of course, some people will never change their minds. So that's a problem too. But I feel like that's the solution, right, is education. That's a big part of our jobs, and part of any kind of community leaders' jobs.
I was going to say that Eric has that patience. He's one of our best educators. So that's why he's been in his role for 30 plus years, but I might not have as much of it. As he does.
Well, you don't see me when I leave work and come home, you don't see how I no.
Well, you haven't even mentioned cats.
Not
There's
today.
probably a reason for that, because if you think the deer issue is emotional, cat, controlling feral cats is really volatile.
Well, even domestic cats. There are two or so cats that go through my yard every once in a while, and I see little piles of feathers. So,
Yeah.
and there are no feral ones right in the neighborhood. They're people's pets.
Yeah, there is a cats indoors a program. I think the American Bird Conservancy, which is another excellent bird conservation group, has information on their website about hopefully trying, again, it's education based, but to educate cat owners that, of what really happens when you let your cat outside.
And I do think a good approach, some of our chapters have taken that on as well. And I do think a successful approach there is sort of the other side of it, which is how unsafe your cat really is when it's outside, because it can become prey as well. You know, cats that are kept indoors live longer and are healthier cats. Mine just came over here for a little visit, but she's gone now. But she stays in. She gets to hunt birds only through the windows, and there's less of them now thanks to those bird curtains. So she has to wait.
The Lights Out initiative, is there a method you have of getting that out into neighborhoods?
Lights Out is a good one. I mean, it's something that I'll say is effective on the larger scale, and that's where we've approached it. We were actually just part of a press release that came out from the state last week. I'll see if I can share that link in a minute. About the state's Lights Out initiative, which would be turning off state-owned buildings. And so we're working on legislation that would impact cities, New York City as well, and we're in partnership with New York City Audubon on that. But yeah, like homeowners themselves can help downward facing lights. You know, it's along the same lines as light pollution as well. So we do find that we've got a lot of common ground with, you know, groups like the Dark Sky Association and others like that who want to reduce light pollution. Like there's lots of reasons to do it. It's, you know, in line with the light pollution piece. It's in line with climate change reduction and energy use reduction. And it's certainly in line with helping migratory birds not be disoriented and you know, impacting their flights during migration times. So we do education around that to a degree. Some of our education programs have that embedded in it, but again, it's mostly working on that at the policy level with state and probably federal too, but mostly at the state level right now. Yeah. It's a good question. Our New York City Audubon chapter, I say ours, our partner, New York City Audubon, they engage in that really heavily, of course, being in New York City. They work every year with the tribute in lights for the World Trade Center tribute. They work in collaboration with that. They have volunteers actually watching the beams of light that are, you know, going up into the sky. They have volunteers watching all night long for the birds. And when enough birds are circling and stuck in those light beams, because that's really what happens. They're flying in, they get disoriented and they stay and they circle until they're basically exhausted if the lights don't come off. So they have been working with that tribute to turn the lights off at increments throughout the night so the birds can fly out and then it starts over. And so that's a really great way and a good way that, you know, chapters and volunteers are part of something that is meant to be beautiful and should stay beautiful, but making sure the impacts for birds are reduced. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great example of compromise, you know, like working with a unusual partner and finding a solution, turning the lights off at the right time for a little while, you know. It's excellent.
That's fascinating. Well, this was really great. Does anybody else have a question before we wrap it up? Thank you so much for that overview, and I will send you the link. We'll post it, and I think a lot of other people will catch it in the future.
Excellent.
Thank you so much. It was great to see you all. Nice to talk about this. Eric and I had fun. We don't always get to work closely together, so when we do, we got to hop on Zoom a couple times to talk about this.
Yeah. Very happy to be invited to meet you all.
Well, thank you again. And this is actually our last speaker series of the season because we hope people will be outside playing at 7 o'clock at night now that it's later. And then we'll resume again in either September or October. We'll get started again.
Great. Well, happy birding and happy nature enjoying to everybody. I hope you have a lovely spring. Enjoy the birds as they come back.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
And thank you, Sarah, too. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
My
Eric.
pleasure. Bye.
Bye.